Sefyu Kamau stood in the middle of the small living room, his hands still covered in grease from the machine he had been fixing. Outside, the sounds of the busy city faded as his father's voice grew louder. Baraka Kamau, a man known for his discipline and harsh words, stared at him with disappointment that felt heavier than any burden Sefyu had ever carried. Sefyu had come home excited to share a small breakthrough in his invention, hoping, just once, for approval. But Baraka didn't even let him finish. He slammed his hand on the table and shouted, "You'll never make this family proud, Sefyu. Never." The words hit Sefyu like a blow to the chest. He stood frozen, feeling as if the world around him had stopped moving. His dream, his work, his endless hours spent building and testing. None of it mattered to the one person whose approval he had always wanted. His father's voice echoed through the room, sharp and unforgiving. Sefyu's heart tightened, but inside him something shifted. Instead of breaking him, the words lit a quiet fire. He felt the sting of humiliation, the pain of rejection, but also a strange wave of determination rising inside him. Baraka turned away, shaking his head in disappointment, as if he had already decided his son would never become anything. Sefyu watched him, feeling the weight of years of doubt and pressure. All the times he was told to stop wasting time with machines, all the moments he tried to impress his father and failed. Everything rushed back at once. But this time, Sefyu didn't crumble. He refused to let the words be the end of his story. He took a slow breath, steadying his voice as his father walked toward the door. This time, Sefyu didn't shout back or argue. Instead, he closed his eyes for a moment, letting the pain settle into something stronger. Then he whispered, almost to himself, but loud enough for the empty room to hear, "One day, you'll say those words again, but with pride." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. A quiet vow. From a young man who had finally decided that his worth would no longer be measured by his father's expectations, but by the future he was determined to create. Sefyu Kamau grew up in a home where expectations were louder than encouragement. His father, Baraka, had always imagined a clear future for him. Either join the military like many men in their family, or take over the construction business that Baraka had built with his own hands. To Baraka, discipline and tradition were the only paths to success. But from a young age, Sefyu's heart was drawn somewhere else. While other boys played football in the street, Sefyu sat on the ground taking apart old radios, trying to understand how every wire worked. He dreamed of building things the world had never seen, machines that could solve everyday problems. His mother, Aisha, saw this spark and quietly supported him. She didn't argue with Baraka, but she slipped Sefyu batteries, old tools, and broken gadgets whenever she could find them. She watched him work in silence, smiling softly whenever he discovered something new. She believed in him even when she didn't have the courage to say it out loud. Sefyu wasn't alone either. His best friend, Kwabena Owusu, understood him better than anyone. While others called Sefyu strange, Kwabena called him brilliant. He would sit beside him, offering ideas, asking questions, and reminding him that big dreams start small. "One day people will line up to see what you build," he would say, and Sefyu believed him. But Baraka didn't. Every time he saw wires, tools, or tiny pieces of metal scattered across the floor, his frustration grew. He would shake his head and say, "These toys won't feed you. They won't build a future." When Sefyu tried to explain his ideas, Baraka brushed them aside, calling them useless machines that would never take him anywhere. The more Sefyu created, the more Baraka criticized. Years passed like this. Sefyu trying to chase his passion, Baraka trying to pull him back to a path he didn't want. Their home became a battlefield of dreams against expectations. Every invention Sefyu built was met with doubt instead of pride, and every step he took toward engineering felt like a step away from his father's approval. Yet deep inside, Sefyu held on to the hope that one day his work would matter, not just to the world, but to the father who never believed in him. The family gathering was meant to be a celebration, but for Sefyu it felt like walking into a spotlight he never asked for. Relatives filled the large courtyard, laughing, sharing stories, showing off their achievements. His cousins spoke proudly about their jobs. One was a banker, another an architect, another recently promoted in the military. Everyone clapped for them, including Baraka, who smiled at each one as if they were his own children. But the moment someone asked, "And Sefyu, what are you doing these days?" the air shifted. Before Sefyu could open his mouth, Baraka stepped forward with a cold laugh. What is he doing? Nothing useful, he said loud enough for the whole circle to hear. This boy builds robots that earn nothing. A disgrace. The laughter that followed wasn't loud, but it was enough to sink into Sefiu's chest like a knife. He felt his face burn as people exchanged awkward looks, some pitying, some amused. He stood there, fighting the urge to defend himself, to explain the prototype he had been working on for months, but his father's words drowned everything. Baraka's disappointment echoed across the gathering, wrapping around Sefiu like a chain he couldn't break. Sefiu quietly excused himself and walked away, leaving behind the noise, the food, and the humiliation. The night air felt heavy as he stepped outside the gate, the streets quiet compared to the chaos inside him. He sat on a bench by the roadside, staring at his hands, the same hands that had built machines, fixed old electronics, and held dreams his father refused to see. For the first time, the shame hurt, deeper than any insult he had heard before. Kwabena found him there, breathless from searching. He sat beside him without speaking at first, simply giving him space. Then he finally said, Sefiu, you can't let today end like this. Show them what you can do. Show the world. He reminded Sefiu of the renewable energy prototype he had been perfecting, the one that could help power small communities. Submit it to the National Innovation Challenge, Kwabena insisted. You're ready. Sefiu looked up, his eyes still hurt but burning with a new determination. The humiliation had cut deep, but it had also awakened something inside him. That night, he made a quiet promise to himself. He would no longer wait for approval. He would create his own path, and prove his worth through his work. Sefiu turned his small garage into a world of wires, tools, and unfinished dreams. Every morning before sunrise and every night long after the neighborhood slept, he sat on the concrete floor working on his renewable energy machine. The garage was cramped and hot, but to Sefiu it felt like the only place where his dreams were safe. He tested circuits, rewired connections, fixed failures, and pushed himself to improve the design. Every tiny spark of progress became fuel to keep going. During one of his late-night tests, a knock on the metal garage door startled him. It was Nandi Diallo, a young tech journalist who had heard rumors about the boy building something unusual in a garage. Curious and bold, she asked to see his prototype. Sefiu hesitated, afraid of judgment, but eventually showed her his work. Instead of laughing or criticizing, Nandi's eyes widened with interest. She asked questions, took notes, and told him, people need to hear about this. A few days later, she published an online feature titled, Young Innovator Creates Device That Could Change Energy in Local Communities. The story spread fast. Strangers from all over the country shared it, praising his creativity and courage. For the first time in his life, Sefiu felt seen by people outside his small world. His inbox filled with messages from students, engineers, and supporters telling him to keep going. One message stood out, an invitation from the National Innovation Challenge. They wanted him to bring his prototype and compete. His hands shook as he read the email over and over, unable to believe it. He rushed into the house to tell his parents. His mother smiled softly, her eyes filled with pride she had never been allowed to show. But Baraka just folded his arms and sighed. Competitions don't feed families, Baraka said with a dismissive shake of his head. Stop wasting your time and come work in the business. The words stung, but this time they didn't break him. With his mother's quiet support and Kwabena's excitement pushing him forward, Sefiu chose to follow the opportunity. Nandi connected him with Obasai Duru, a respected engineering professor, who offered guidance and helped him refine the design. With new allies and a glimmer of recognition, Sefiu felt the first real step of his dream taking shape. The journey was still long, but for the first time, he finally believed he could make it. As Sefiu prepared for the Innovation Challenge, he discovered that success attracted more than praise, it attracted competition. Some rivals from the tech community began paying unusual attention to his work. One afternoon, he returned to his garage to find his notes scattered and some of his components missing. Someone had clearly tried to copy or steal his idea. The violation shook him, but he tightened security and pushed forward, refusing to let fear stop him. He worked harder than ever, but pressure built around him. While testing a new version of the prototype, a sudden spark turned into a burst of smoke. The device exploded in front of him, filling the garage with the smell of burnt wires. Sefyu fell back, coughing and staring at the charred remains of months of effort. For a long moment, he sat on the floor in silence, holding his head in his hands. The failure felt too big to recover from. He questioned everything, his talent, his dream, and whether his father had been right all along. Determined not to give up, he went to the bank hoping for a loan to rebuild the device. But after reviewing his application, the manager shook his head apologetically. "We cannot support this project," he said. The rejection hit him harder than he expected. As he walked out of the bank, he felt smaller than ever, carrying the weight of disappointment like a stone in his chest. That night, as he sat alone in the garage, his mother quietly approached. Aisha placed a small envelope beside him. Inside was money, her hidden savings collected over years. Sefyu looked at her in shock. She simply smiled and said, "I believe in you. Use this to finish what you started." Her faith lit a spark inside him stronger than any insult or failure. With the little money he now had, Sefyu bought new parts and began rebuilding from scratch. Every piece he fixed, every wire he replaced, reminded him why he started. The setbacks no longer felt like signs to quit but challenges to rise above. His hands moved with renewed determination, and slowly, the new prototype began to take shape. He refused to let sabotage, failure, or pressure define him. This time, he was building not just a machine, but his future. When the day of the competition qualifiers arrived, Sefyu stood backstage with his hands trembling slightly. The room buzzed with talented inventors and engineers, each presenting their creations with confidence. His rebuilt prototype stood on the table beside him, a symbol of months of sleepless nights and endless struggle. As his name was called, he took a deep breath and stepped forward, determined not to let fear win this time. He connected the machine, explained its design, and demonstrated how it could convert simple kinetic motion into renewable energy, affordable and powerful. Direction, and the sound of clicking shutters followed every movement. As Sefyu walked in with his prototype, he felt a rush of nerves, but underneath it was a quiet confidence he had never felt before. He was no longer the boy in a small garage. He was someone the world was finally paying attention to. When it was his turn to present, Sefyu stepped onto the stage, his hands steady and his voice clear. He introduced himself, then carefully explained how his device worked and how it could help communities struggling with electricity. As he demonstrated the prototype, the lights on the machine glowed brightly, showing exactly how much energy it could produce. Murmurs of admiration spread through the audience. For the first time in his life, he didn't feel small. He felt powerful, not because of fame, but because his creation was making people believe in possibility. As he ended his presentation, the hall went silent for a moment, and then applause erupted like a wave crashing through the room. People stood on their feet, cheering, clapping, shouting his name. Journalists rushed forward to take pictures, and young students looked at him with admiration. In that moment, Sefyu felt something he had been chasing for years, a sense of belonging, a feeling that his work mattered. Among the crowd, President Mandla Sabanda watched with keen interest. When the cheering softened, the president walked onto the stage, his presence instantly shifting the energy in the hall. He shook Sefyu's hand firmly, smiling with genuine respect. Cameras flashed rapidly, capturing every second of the moment. The president looked at the audience, then back at Sefyu, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Young man, Africa needs minds like yours." The sentence spread across the room and beyond. People recorded it, shared it online, and within minutes it became the viral clip of the expo. Sefyu stood there, overwhelmed but proud, realizing that this moment, this stage, this recognition, was the beginning of something far bigger than he had ever imagined. He had stepped into a future he once thought was impossible. The energy in the expo hall was electric as the president, Mandla Sabanda, stepped forward and pointed toward Sefyu. "Young man, come up here," he said, his voice carrying across the vast room. Sefyu's heart raced, but this time it wasn't fear. This was anticipation, the kind that comes when years of hard work are finally recognized. He walked toward the stage, each step echoing in the crowded hall, aware of every camera lens pointed at him, every pair of eyes watching intently. As he reached the president, the room fell into a hush. Mandla Sabanda extended his hand and shook Sefyu's firmly, a gesture that carried respect, admiration, and encouragement all at once. The cameras flashed nonstop, capturing the historic handshake that would soon flood news outlets and social media across the country. For Sefiu, the moment was surreal. Years of ridicule, late nights in a cramped garage, and countless failures all seemed to melt away as he stood there, recognized not only for his invention, but for his perseverance. Then the president turned to the audience, his tone proud and commanding. "The government will fully support this young man's innovation," he announced, funding his work to help bring sustainable energy to communities across Africa. The crowd erupted in cheers and applause, some even standing to show their appreciation. Reporters scrambled to interview Sefiu, while young inventors in the audience whispered to each other, inspired by the young man's journey from obscurity to national recognition. In the crowd, Baraka Kamau stood frozen. His eyes were wide with shock, his mouth slightly open. He had spent years doubting, criticizing, and dismissing his son's passion. Now, seeing Sefiu celebrated by the president himself, a wave of regret and disbelief washed over him. He leaned forward, whispering almost to himself, "That's my son." The words carried both awe and sorrow, a realization that he had misjudged his child for so long. For Sefiu, the handshake symbolized more than recognition. It was a validation of his journey, his struggles, and his unwavering belief in himself. That single moment on the stage marked the turning point. The world now saw Sefiu Kamau as a visionary, and even his father could no longer deny the brilliance of the young man he had once called a failure. The day after the expo, the house felt different. News of Sefiu's achievement had spread everywhere, and the atmosphere was thick with both pride and tension. Baraka Kamau stood at the edge of the room, watching his son move about, handling calls, and responding to messages from journalists and investors. For the first time, he saw Sefiu not as a dreamer or a failure, but as a capable, determined young man who had earned the respect of the nation. Finally, Baraka took a deep breath and approached Sefiu. The older man's usual stern expression was softened by humility and a hint of shame. "Sefiu," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "I was wrong. You've made this family proud, more than I ever imagined." His eyes, usually so sharp and critical, now glistened with unshed tears. Sefiu paused, looking at his father, feeling the weight of years of doubt, criticism, and disappointment in those few words. For a moment, silence hung between them. Sefiu's heart raced, memories of harsh words and ridicule clashing with the relief of this long-awaited acknowledgement. Then he spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Father, I forgive you, but I need you to understand something. I only needed you to believe in me. Not just now, but back when I was struggling, back when I needed support instead of doubt." Baraka lowered his gaze, shame and pride mixing in his expression. He nodded slowly, the realization of his mistakes settling deep inside him. "I see that now, son," he admitted quietly. "I see it now." They stood together, not in perfect harmony yet, but in a moment of mutual respect. Sefiu didn't demand praise, and Baraka didn't force forgiveness. Instead, they allowed the years of tension to soften, replaced by cautious hope. The air between them, once heavy with judgment and disappointment, began to feel lighter, warmer, as if finally, a bridge had been built between them. That evening, they didn't speak much more. Words weren't necessary. Sefiu's achievements had said everything, and Baraka's quiet presence beside him said that perhaps, finally, father and son could move forward together, acknowledging the past but ready to face a future built on respect, understanding, and newfound pride. Years of struggle, sleepless nights, and relentless determination culminated in a moment Sefiu Kamau had dreamed about but never dared to imagine. Standing in front of a modern building buzzing with excitement, he prepared to cut the ribbon for his very own tech center, a space dedicated to young innovators, inventors, and dreamers like himself. The center was filled with bright screens, 3D printers, and workstations ready to bring ideas to life. Students from across the city gathered, eyes wide with curiosity and hope, waiting to explore, learn, and create. As Sefiu spoke to the crowd, he could feel the energy of possibility pulsing through the room. Parents, teachers, and young innovators listened intently, inspired by the journey of the boy who had once been dismissed as a failure. The community cheered, applauded, and celebrated his achievement, recognizing him as a symbol of modern African brilliance. A young man whose courage and creativity had broken barriers and redefined what was possible. Among the crowd, Baraka Kamau stood with quiet pride. Gone was the doubt, the scolding, the criticism. He watched his son with admiration, realizing how far Sephu had come and how much his own belief, or lack of it, had mattered. When Sephu finished his speech and turned to cut the ribbon, Baraka stood beside him, placing a hand on his shoulder, a simple gesture filled with love, acknowledgement, and pride. After the ceremony, Sephu walked through the tech center, watching students experiment with new inventions, asking questions, and showing off prototypes. He paused in a quiet corner, looking up at a framed photo of the president shaking his hand at the National Innovation Expo. The moment when everything changed. He smiled softly, remembering the journey from ridicule and doubt to recognition and triumph. "The world didn't change for me," he whispered. "I changed for the world." It was a statement not of arrogance, but of reflection, proof that one person's perseverance could ignite the potential in many. As Sephu turned back to the buzzing room of bright young minds, he realized this was only the beginning. The legacy he had built wasn't just about his invention. It was about inspiring others to dream bigger, reach higher, and believe in themselves, just as he had learned to believe in himself. The future was alive in that room, and Sephu Kamau had become its guiding light.